Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. If you don't already know, my name is Christy, and this channel is all about deconstructing your former evangelical, fundamentalist, and conservative Christian beliefs. Do y'all remember when I used to say all that at the beginning of every video? The core purpose of this channel still exists, and it's still very important. And encouraging people to think more critically about what they believe, to walk away from beliefs that no longer serve them, and feel empowered to follow their own path in life, even if it looks different than the path others chose for you. I think those are very important messages that we need to keep repeating and we need to support. And so I'm really hoping to get back to deconstruction content on this channel. And I'm even going to be revisiting some old topics that, I might have a fresh look at, and I might have some new thoughts on. A few years ago, I put out a video that ended up going viral, and it was called 5 Bible Passages That Caused Me to Lose My Faith. It received over 1 million views. People are still watching it today. And I think that's just because it resonated with a lot of people. And I think at some point during every Christian's life, they get to a situation where they're reading the Bible or they're learning something and it doesn't quite click right. It just doesn't make sense, or it seems to contradict what they know about reality. And they have to decide if they are going to explore that doubt and that curiosity, or if they're just going to shut it down and believe what they believe because it's easier. And that happened to me on my Christian journey because I was so dedicated to my faith that I wanted to learn as much as possible. I wanted to be a better Christian, and I wanted to be able to give an answer for anyone who asks about my faith, which is what I was taught in Sunday school, in church, and from the Bible. And so I dug into the Bible to learn as much as I could, but the more I learned, the more questions I had, and the more the teachings seemed to contradict one another. I felt like I was getting so many mixed messages just from reading the Bible and listening to various religious leaders who all had their own subjective interpretation of these texts. And so I want to revisit these 5 Bible verses, give just a really quick recap. I'll link that original video in the comments and the description so you can go watch it if you want. And then I'm going to give you more Bible passages that were also a big part of my deconstruction journey. But before I do, I just want to make it very clear that when I deconstruct on this channel, it's pretty much always from the evangelical Christianity that I grew up in. And there are thousands and thousands of denominations of Christianity worldwide. There are all kinds of different interpretations, and there would be no way to deconstruct Christianity as a whole because it varies wildly between denominations and between individuals. The first verse that I talked about in that original video was Romans 9, and it's about God's sovereign choice. And it talks about how God decides who he is going to have mercy on and who he is not going to have mercy on. And that is completely his decision. It's not up to the individual. There are so many interpretations of this verse, but the Calvinist interpretation, which was the one that I ended up kind of clinging to for a little while before everything fell apart, is that there is really no personal choice when it comes to being a Christian or not. That a person becomes a Christian because God intended for them to. They are saved and they go to heaven because God created them to be saved and go to heaven. But some people reject God and they go to hell, and God created them for that purpose. And so within the Calvinist worldview, evangelicalism kind of becomes pointless, because what's the point of witnessing to someone to save them if God has already decided what their future holds? Another verse that really kind of blew my mind was Psalm 137:9. This one says, "Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks." I think the celebration of violence against infants really just broke my brain and broke my faith. Deuteronomy 22:28 through 29 is about a woman who is forced to marry a man who rapes her. Deuteronomy 20:10 through 18 was a major turning point for me when it talks about marching up to neighboring cities and offering people peace, and that if they accept your peace, you're supposed to just forcibly enslave them, either trick people, like lie to them, mislead them into your intentions just so you can forcibly enslave them, or to just just slaughter everyone, including livestock and women and children. And then John 3:16 was also on that list. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. And I think what really made me struggle with that was this concept of belief as a measure for morality, and that what you believe determines where you go in the afterlife, not what kind of person you are or what your intentions are. What you don't know, you don't know. And if you don't know something, why would you believe it? And so placing this moral emphasis on belief was a big struggle for me, because it didn't make sense. So those were in the original video. Again, I'll link that in the description or the comments if you want to go watch it. But there's 5 more that I'd like to include or add on to this list. Numbers 31 is a really difficult passage to justify if you are an evangelical Christian and you believe that God is not only love, but he is perfect justice. He is perfect righteousness, and he cannot sin. He cannot do something that is immoral or unethical. In Numbers 31, starting in verse 1, it says, "The Lord said to Moses, take vengeance on the Midianites for the Israelites. After that, you will be gathered to your people." So as we can see, starting in verse 1, this is a direct command from God. This is not one of those description versus prescription moments. And it says that Moses went to the people. He said, "Arm some of your men, go to war against the Midianites so they may carry out the Lord's vengeance on them, send them into battle." And in verse 7, it says they fought as the Lord commanded Moses. They killed every man. Verse 9, it says the Israelites captured the Midianite women and children and took all the Midianite herds and flocks and goods as plunder. And then they burned the towns down. And in verse 14, Moses gets angry with the officers of the army. "Have you allowed all of the women to live?" They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord. And in verse 17, he says, "Now go kill all the boys, kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. Save the virgins for yourself." This is a story of Moses receiving a command from God and then making sure that that command is completely carried out. And on that same theme, you also have 1 Samuel 15. Samuel says to Saul, "I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over the people. So listen to the message from the Lord." So again, I really like to make sure that we go back to the beginning of these chapters and we look at these passages and see, okay, where is this command coming from? Because if it's just coming from some guy that is disobeying the Lord, well, then it's just describing the event. But if this is a direct command from God, then we probably should pay attention and look at the morality of this command. He says, "I will punish the Amalekites for what they did in Israel. Now go attack them, totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children, infants, cattle, sheep, camel, donkeys. Go kill men, women, children, infants." So when we go back to Psalm 137:9 from my original video, in that video, you'll see there's a lot of comments of people that really didn't like that I brought up that verse. They're like, God wasn't telling people to go kill babies. He wasn't celebrating killing babies. That was just, somebody being in distress, somebody very upset and just expressing their feelings. But right here, very clearly, God says, go put to death women, children, and infants. And this is the point when the apologist, the Christian apologist, has to find a way to defend it, because they will jump and say, hey, Psalm 137:9 does not endorse killing infants, because that initial response, that's their internal moral compass. That's feeling disgust, feeling put off by the idea that God would feel happy over bashing infants against rocks. And so that initial reaction to Psalm 137:9 is the human moral reaction to something that is horrific. And so they have to find a way to justify that and say, no, that wasn't God, that was humans, and humans aren't perfect. But then if you show them this passage in 1 Samuel, where it says, very, very clearly, do not spare anyone, go kill infants. Now the apologist has to defend God's immorality, because at the end of the day, they have to defend God, and they have to believe that God is all powerful, he is all good, and whatever he does is good, no matter how bad it seems to us, measly little humans. They always have to be obedient to God before they ever have to consider being moral, because being obedient That is the ultimate morality. And so morality becomes kind of obsolete, right? It becomes pointless because it's really not about what's moral and ethical. It's about what God says. It's about being obedient to him, even when what he is doing is immoral and unethical. That didn't work for me in my younger mind. I needed more clear-cut morality than that, not one that could just change based on who was giving the order. And it didn't feel fair to me that I had to feel so guilty for things that I might say or do, or little human mistakes that I would make, or my thought crimes, that I would have to feel guilty for that as something terrible and sinful and deserving of eternal punishment. But God could command the killing of infants and be called good, holy, and righteous and perfect. But also in verse 10, it says, the word of the Lord came to Samuel, and it says, I regret that I have made Saul king because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. And so in this story, Saul actually spares some people. In verse 9, it says, Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle and the fat calves and lambs and everything that was good. They were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. And he says, I regret that I have made Saul king. How does an omniscient God who creates someone knowing every single thing that that person will do, who they will become, the choices they will make, how does he do that? And then regrets having done that. He's making them with foreknowledge, knowing he's one day going to regret making them, but he still continues making them and then gets to the point where he regrets doing it. It's not a reflection of an omniscient God, a God who knows everything, who plans out the future, who has foreknowledge. It's just like in Noah's flood, when God regrets making humans, and so he wipes them all off the face of the earth with a giant flood. This contradicts the idea of this omnipotent, omniscient God, because what kind of all-knowing, all-powerful God has regrets? And then, of course, there is the Passover in Exodus. Now, there's a lot of different interpretations between religions about this, but from the evangelical Christian perspective, I think about this God who has decided that he wants to just kill everyone in really violent and horrific ways, like very torturous ways. So he sends all these plagues and does all these things just because the Pharaoh's heart was hardened, except for God was the one that hardened his heart. And it's funny, growing up in the church, they told me, well, he hardened his heart first. And I always thought, yeah, but he could have changed his mind. If God hardened his heart, he can't change his mind. And so God has taken away his free will. So God interrupts free will, takes it away from the Pharaoh, so that Pharaoh does the thing that God says he doesn't want him to do, and then decides to punish everyone for it. And not just everyone, but also the firstborn of every family. In verse 12, on that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, that I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I'll pass over. And so, you know, everybody that didn't want their firstborn killed, that believed in this God, needed to put the blood on the door, and then if he saw the blood, he'd just keep going. But if there was no blood on that door, then the firstborn of that family would die, whether they were an adult or a child, didn't matter. If they were the firstborn in that family, they were dead. So God killed people's kids because of something that he caused. And I don't really understand this collective punishment, this idea that a child should be punished for the sins of their parents, for what their parent chooses to do, and punished by God. You would think that God would want to save the children of evil or corrupt or wicked parents, but instead he punishes them. And it's just like in the story of Adam and Eve. From the very beginning, he showed that he loved this idea of kin punishment, where he punishes the sons for the sins of the father. And really not just the sons, but the whole world. We all have to experience sin and suffering because of the sins of Adam and Eve. And so if you look at this from a very literal interpretation, it just really doesn't add up with a God who is very smart, very loving. And I think that there are so many subjective interpretations that you could get things out of this story that might, be a little bit more rooted in mythology rather than an actual real event. But because evangelical Christians believe that these are real stories, these are literal interpretations. I was raised fundamentalist, which means you're reading a literal interpretation. Because of that, that that creates so many problems in this story of a God who is not very kind, not very loving, not very smart, not forward thinking. This God just wants to punish, and he doesn't want to consider any nuance whatsoever. I just don't see how collective punishment can be divine justice. That those two things just don't fit together. They're completely contradictory. Another one was Luke 14:26. It says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Jesus spoke in a lot of hyperboles. He used a lot of extreme speech to make points. And it's important to remember that when you're reading the words of Jesus, because there are times when he says things that he doesn't really mean. You kind of have to read between the lines or interpret it, which is, again, why it's not a good idea to decide that all of these things have objective meanings and there's only one meaning you can get from them, and it's whatever your pastor has decided. But if we were to read this literally, it's not a good look, right? Jesus is literally telling you to abandon your family, abandon your support systems, to abandon yourself, and to follow him. Isolation from family is kind of the hallmark of a cult. And so if you read this literally, you're looking at Jesus as a cult leader who says you need to abandon your family, your friends, your loved ones, and come follow me. If anybody in my life who I love suddenly just abandoned me in our relationship in order to go follow some random guy that they just met, I would probably be fearful that they were in a cult. But even if we don't read this literally, even if we read it as it was intended, Jesus didn't really mean hate. He was just making a comparison that you should love God so much that in comparison, all other love looks like hate. And I remember one time I was at my parents' work. They were a manager of a construction company, and they had an employee who was not a Christian, was an open atheist, and I knew about that. And as a Christian, as an evangelical Christian, I was taught that you're supposed to always witness to people. If somebody didn't believe in Jesus, it was your job and your responsibility as a Christian to witness to them and to share Jesus with them. And so I did that one day, and I got in trouble because, well, HR doesn't like it when you do those kind of things in the workplace. I didn't know that because I was like 14 or 15. I was just doing what I was taught to do, what I was told was the right thing to do for God. But my parent got on to me and I got in trouble, and we had a really long argument about it because I didn't understand why I wasn't allowed to witness to people at their workplace. And when they explained it to me that, it's against the rules, it's against HR, that my parent could get in trouble, to me, I was like, but there's nothing more important than our relationship with God. There's nothing more important than people getting saved. And so why do you care if you get fired? Why do you care if your job won't like it? You're not here to please them. You're here to please God. And I even went to my church mentor and the pastor and asked them, I was like, I'm supposed to literally hate my family in comparison to God. And I'm supposed to obey God and do what he says. And he says, go save people, go tell everyone about Jesus. And it was so confusing for me. And I think it just kind of ended with them basically not knowing how to handle it and just telling me that it was in my best interest to just obey my parent. And that by doing so, I would be obeying God. This was such a defining moment because I was thinking there is no clear-cut answer here. And I need a clear-cut answer because I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. Am I going to follow the words of Jesus and do what he says? Or am I going to follow my family and do what my parents say? Both things I'm told to do in the Bible, but those two things are contradicting one another. So the reason I share these things is because so often we walk through life being taught something or told something, and we just accept it, and we don't really put a lot of thought into it. And that's not just in religion, it's all over the place. Even when we're scrolling on the internet and there's a news story or a meme or an article or a quote that we see, and it just gets into the brain and we accept it and we just keep scrolling. And sometimes those things aren't true. Sometimes it's a lie or somebody trying to trick us, or it's misinformation. So this is very common, just in the lived human experience. But if you're growing up in the church, a lot of times that indoctrination of belief is paired with fear indoctrination. It's paired with threats of hell and punishment and shame and guilt. And so you're told to accept something, and your brain will just accept it without wanting to put too much thought into it, because to even reconsider it or to push back on it might actually be a sin, and it might separate you from God. It might even end up sending you to hell, because doubting means you're probably not a true believer. You don't really have enough faith. And so people will override that curiosity and those questions and the doubts with faith, because faith is what saves them and what keeps them safe. But sometimes when you just sit and think about it and you allow yourself to have the doubts and the questions and to explore the things that you're taught to believe, sometimes you kind of quickly figure out that it doesn't add up and it doesn't make sense. And that's when you have to decide, am I going to follow this and keep questioning, or am I just going to shut it off and stay faithful because I don't want to get in trouble, because I don't want God to be mad, because I don't want to go to hell? If you're only believing something or staying in a religion because you're afraid of what God might do to you if you ask questions or walk away, then is it really genuine faith? Do you really believe it? Or are you just being coerced into something that you might not believe if you weren't being threatened? And I want people to think more critically about their beliefs, why they believe things, and if it aligns with their view of reality, their own perspective, what they understand about the world. Because a lot of these teachings and beliefs are utilized by people who want to cause harm, who want to have power and control over you, rather than people who want good things for you. And so if we make it a practice to just accept what we're taught rather than questioning it or thinking more critically about it, then we could fall into some really bad beliefs and we could be victimized by some really bad people. And so making it a practice to question what you believe, what you're taught, what you're told, that keeps you safe. It ensures that you're not falling victim to someone else, and you're not getting trapped inside of a system or a belief that doesn't serve you but serves someone else. And maybe you think about it more and you just still believe it. It's still true. You don't really have much reason to question it because it makes sense to you. Well, great. You thought about it and you realized it's true, and now you can feel more confident moving forward that that belief is held by you because you believe it, not because someone else told you to believe it. And so when I deconstruct these things and I talk about these things in the Bible, a lot of people find it to be disrespectful. They think that I'm trying to make people leave Christianity, or I'm trying to bash on the Bible, God, or Christians. And really what I'm doing is I'm just showcasing the practice of questioning what you're taught, what you read, and what you're given. And if it's not aligning with my morality, what I know about reality, then why should I hold on to that? And that should be across the board for any religion, any belief, any ideology, any political talking points. These things should all be coming through a filter of critical thinking and processing. So I want everyone to think more critically about what they believe, what they're taught, because I want to live in a world where people are thinking more critically, who aren't just accepting whatever they're told, because that is contributing to a lot of the problems that we experience right now in the world and in the United States today. People just accepting whatever they're told and not thinking too much about it. And a lot of this starts in the church. People are trained in their most formative years to not think too much about it, not question it, not doubt, because if you do, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. You're going to be harmed by God. He's going to punish you. And so I hope to use this channel and to use my platform and my voice always to encourage people to think critically, to examine their beliefs, to question, to doubt. And with that, if you are afraid that you're going to go to hell or God's going to be angry at you for questioning or doubting, what I usually tell people is, if God is love, if he is good, if he is holy and righteous and good and understanding, if he created you and your brain, then when you doubt and you question and you go through the deconstruction process, he gave you that ability to do that. He gave you the ability to question and to think critically. And why would he punish you for just making sure that what you believe is true? Why would he be angry with you for examining your beliefs? Even the Bible says that you should carefully examine your beliefs to make sure that they are true. So this is actually biblical. And I think anyone who's telling you that it isn't, anyone who's telling you that it's bad to do so, does not have critical thinking at the front of their mind. and what they want for you. They don't want you to be someone who is a critical thinker, who carefully examines information. They just want you to blindly believe. And I think we all recognize that just blindly believing whatever you're told is never a good idea in any circumstance. That it's always better to think a little more about it and to examine it and make sure that it aligns with your understanding of reality, of yourself, of the world around you. For me, deconstruction is about listening to myself and trusting the natural intuition that I have, trusting the process of critical thinking and examination. If you want to support my channel and you want me to make more deconstruction content, please make sure that you're subscribed. You can leave a comment or share this video to help boost it in the algorithm. That helps me a lot. I also have a website, jezebelvibes.com. It's kind of older. I haven't really updated it in a while, but it has a shop on there if you want to get some of my merch. I've got some t-shirts and mugs in my shop. I'll have that linked in the description so you can go check it out for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.